Thank you. Welcome to the National Pulse. Natalie's breaking things over here. Good afternoon. I'm Raheem Kassam, Editor-in-Chief of thenationalpulse.com. We've got a lot of news up on the site today, and I want to jump straight into it. Natalie Winter's here to help us break down some of the latest of what we know is going on as it relates to this election, to the counts that are taking place. Molly McCann of Counsel with Sidney Powell will be joining us very shortly, and Kane from CitizenFreePress.com, the best drudge replacement aggregator out there. Let's take it from the top, Natalie. The lead story on the site right now, how Joe Biden made a surprise appearance at the Allegheny County Election Board's election for chairman of that group. Now, that's a very small position for the former vice president to seemingly care about. Why would Joe Biden, and tell us when Joe Biden turned up in Allegheny County to celebrate with his buddy Rich Fitzgerald?
Sure. So Rich Fitzgerald won re-election to become the county executive for Allegheny County. Again, that's a county in Pennsylvania, which, as we know, statewide, there's been a lot of voting irregularities, voter fraud, illegal votes being cast in that state. Allegheny's also been flagged because they recently decided to count over 2,000 ballots, even ballots that had no dates on them. Nonetheless, the individual who certainly helped make that decision reality was none other than Rich Fitzgerald, who, in addition to being the county executive, also chairs the county's election board, which convenes regularly. They played a very important process and role in determining the shift to mail-in ballots, determining what type of voting system should be used in the county. But as you said, it's still a relatively small position, so it's interesting why Joe Biden would have attended his victory night party in late 2019 as a candidate for president. He went there, he spoke. There's videos in the article. You can see supporters swarming him. He praises Rich Fitzgerald as a, quote, hell of a man. And interestingly enough, on Rich Fitzgerald's Facebook, he offered, essentially, I believe the quote was, "We know Joe Biden can win here and we're ready to help him." Certainly maybe an incriminating or interesting statement in light of how things have turned out in Allegheny County, especially when you look at those 2,000 ballots that don't have dates yet. Mr. Fitzgerald has determined that they should be counted, and something tells me they're probably overwhelmingly for Joe Biden.
So, I mean, this is kind of evidence that people have been looking for a long time, that these people are in the tank for Joe Biden, and they're the ones making the decisions over what votes get counted, over what illegal votes get counted. Let's be very clear about that. They're not saying, hey, these votes are legal and they were just found somewhere in the middle of the night necessarily. They're illegal votes in the sense that they weren't correctly completed. And these guys who have said, Rich Fitzgerald is on the record as having said he's ready to help Joe Biden, is using that position to help Joe Biden. Now, one of my biggest frustrations in the last week, Natalie, is that the Trump campaign and the apparatus have just not been prepared for this. No matter how much we told them it was going to happen, how much we walked them through the Transition Integrity Project documents. So there's a part of me which feels like, oh, well, you know, some of these people in these positions who should have been putting this stuff into place, looking into people like Rich Fitzgerald from the outset, deserve what they're getting right now. But the public certainly doesn't deserve it. The Trump base doesn't deserve it. The country doesn't deserve it. Western civilization doesn't deserve it. And planet Earth doesn't deserve it. So we have to park our frustrations for a minute and go back and go through this stuff, because now I'm getting asked, you know, a full week plus after I assembled a team of statisticians to look into the data as it was coming out from Pennsylvania and other places around the country, I'm now getting asked questions from legal teams for the president in Pennsylvania. Hey, Raheem, you know any statisticians? Yeah, I only tried to put the team together last week. Did, by the way. Had 20 people lined up, ready to go, some of the smartest people I've ever encountered. I don't even know what the charts show, but they explain it to me, and they explain it very well. We're so far down this path now, and you're getting breaking news coming out of Arizona, you're getting breaking news coming out of Georgia. We'll talk to Molly McCann in the next segment about what we're learning is going on in Georgia. But this is the type of stuff, Natalie, that represents a smoking gun. You have a public official here saying that he is going to help Joe Biden a year ahead of the election.
And frankly, this goes all the way up to the top. You really could build a case that there was voter fraud, or at least a calculated effort to secure a victory for Joe Biden, just from the Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts of a lot of Pennsylvania officials alone. For example, the Secretary of State of Pennsylvania, Kathy Boockvar, who was recently sued by the Trump administration, had a tweet January 25th, 2017, which, if I recall, that would just be 5 days after President Trump was inaugurated, saying, quote, may all federal agencies follow suit and quickly. Hashtag rise up, hashtag resist. As we know, the resist hashtag is really a call for war against President Trump. The resistance, the primary movement for anti-Trump actors. So, yeah, you go through these Twitter accounts. There's also a host, I believe, the Arizona Secretary of State. People had unearthed similar tweets from her, or even yesterday, as we discussed, Joe Biden's selection for Chief of Staff, Ronald Klain, in 2014. He agreed with Vox that, quote, all elections, the majority of Americans believed that elections were rigged. So these tweets, as I said, have been around since 2014, since 2017, but seemingly we've done nothing and really have waited till the last hour to step in and finally do something. But, a tweet calling these individuals out certainly doesn't compare to preemptive legal action.
I mean, this isn't even the last hour. Now we're in overtime here, and it's starting to look particularly poor in some of these places. We'll get the thoughts of Molly McCann of Sidney Powell Council in just a moment. I want to also take a moment to thank all of the members who have joined up now. There are far too many who have been joining up on the nationalpulse.com/support in the last week or so to read all of the names out like we like to do on this show every Friday. But we'll get through as many of them. I'll get through as many of them later on in the show as possible. Stick around, because we're going to be talking to Kane as well. Kane from Citizen Free Press, who has been plugging away, watching what the news is saying. Kane's a man who has more browser windows open than you could possibly imagine. He knows everything that's going on. We'll be joined by Molly McCann and Kane. Let's get some updates on the state of play as it's going around the country now. Usually I could say to you, I'll just look at social media and you'll know everything you need to know. Unfortunately, that's not true anymore. In fact, if you look at social media, you'll learn mostly what you don't need to know, or things that are just manifestly untrue. Facebook has removed, for instance, from President Trump's Facebook official account, the word president. Now, that's bizarre enough as it is, given the fact that the President of the United States will at least remain the President of the United States until 11:59 a.m. on January the 20th. So now we have to bring you the news in a slightly different format that we've been accustomed to, or become accustomed to, in the last couple of years, if not over the past sort of decade or so. So stick with us. I want to walk us through this very, very simply. Molly McCann joins us of counsel with Sidney Powell. Molly, whenever I go to tweet something now or retweet something now, or look for the latest information about what's going on in Georgia, it's all muddled. There's things on top of tweets that don't let me see them. There's other things where I can't retweet certain things. So we're relying on you to bring us the latest information. We'll here. There you go. That's your own little verified tick mark on this show. So Molly, give it to us. What's the latest?
Well, I'm very disturbed to learn today that the Georgia recount, on which so many of us are relying, is not going to be the intensive recount we thought it would be. I actually learned some of this from your own show, War Room, this morning, Raheem, and I encourage everyone to listen to that show if you have the time, from 10 till noon Eastern time. But what we learned today on your show, and what I learned from other sources and doing some digging, is that the recount in Georgia simply is not the audit we thought it would be. They're only permitting one observer for 10 teams, so essentially the GOP can only watch 10% of the action. They're keeping them far removed from the tables where the counting is going on. They're not matching addresses with ballots. We are not going to uncover the fraud in Georgia the way we were told we would be able to. And that's alarming, because it means that the recount will just retabulate the illegal votes and we'll lose the state, which is that Georgia is critical. It really is critical to the White House.
They're using the word recount in a literal sense, whereas the word recount actually is supposed to be a technical thing that you do in order to remove votes that shouldn't have been counted. Or, as you say, all they're doing is recounting the illegal votes. Maybe we should have been more specific. I would have thought that these people would have known better. And I know people down in Georgia and officials down in Georgia had made it very clear what they wanted. Instead of one person looking at 10 people, 10 tables or whatever it is being recounted and being kept, I think, behind this big yellow line of tape nearly 20 foot away in some instances. What happened? Do you have any idea what happened here? Because it just seems we're being totally hoodwinked as far as I'm concerned.
Well, the GOP in Georgia appears to be having a real meltdown. And I have been hearing now since the election, frankly, that Governor Kemp, we all thought Governor Kemp was quite solid, but Governor Kemp and his Lieutenant Governor Duncan, they are not stepping up in Georgia and leading as they should. I have heard from Rudy Giuliani, and I don't know if this is true, but apparently Rudy Giuliani says that one of Kemp's former chiefs of staff is now a lobbyist for Dominion. And that's very concerning to me. Those two should be on the front line, heading the charge to make sure we have a full audit. But the concern is that they might not want to uncover a massive fraud or a complete disaster in the tabulation, because it will reflect very poorly upon them.
Hit me with that again, Molly. Who's a lobbyist for Dominion now?
Well, according to Rudy Giuliani, and I have not independently verified this, but according to Giuliani, one of Governor Kemp's former chiefs of staff is now a lobbyist for Dominion. And
Wow.
Of course, Dominion was used in Georgia, and Dominion has become a disaster zone. And I do have an update for you on Dominion, Raheem. I am hearing that none of these recounts and none of the audits are going to uncover the fraud in Dominion. The Dominion systems must be impounded, disconnected from the internet, not turned off, but disconnected from the internet, and a forensic examination must be done of the electronics of those machines to determine if they were creating a fraud.
Okay, let me clarify something on that. When you say impounded and effectively air-gapped, you mean to have somebody actually go through the machine as it was used during the election to figure out precisely how it was worked. Do we do that? Do we want to be doing that in all, I think it's 20 states that Dominion's deployed in some way?
I mean, ideally, yes, we would do that in all 20 states. I mean, I'm someone who thinks that we need to, this is a triage situation. Let's focus all of our energy on the states where Dominion was used and that are swing states. If we were to show any fraud anywhere in any part of the system of Dominion, it would blow it wide open. So I don't think we have to think about, we need to be attacking in 20 states. We just need to demand this access and this transparency in one place or two places. And if we find that the system it has code, and I'm not an expert, Raheem, on electronics, but I've been told by different people who do know that you should be able to find the code in a computer system like this that might potentially be skewing the election results. And I'm telling you, if you found that in one place, it would blow the whole Dominion scandal wide open.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. And, we had a story up yesterday, Molly, about Dominion Voting Systems retaining the Obama-era vote protection director as a lobbyist. So we'll get Natalie Winters looking into the Governor Kemp story and see if we can verify that independently as well. Look, I agree with you. I mean, I would go further, but it doesn't seem like we can get even one at the moment. So, I guess we've got to take what we can get in this regard. But I would go all 20 states. I would also look at who signed off on these things, what the tender process was, investigate every single one of these people. Frankly, I'd be looking into their bank accounts to see if they were taking any money to be doing this sort of thing. I mean, this is kind of like a big pharma situation. But here you've got, I don't know if we've got a big vote, big election situation. Somebody somewhere has been signing off on this. I mean, look. The Texas Secretary of State went through this and said, actually, this is a trash voting system. We do not want to introduce this into our state. So in all of these other places, there has to be a paper trail of people who have signed off on this. Molly, I know we've got to let you go here, but why don't you just let us know, what's your website? How can people follow you?
My website is www.mollymccann.com. And I'm on Twitter, Moll McCann, MOL McCann.
And I see you're getting thousands upon thousands of retweets as well at the moment. Make sure, ladies and gentlemen, that you're following Molly McCann for all of the latest. And she does these great updates every day on her website. Thank you, Molly, for joining us here today. All right, when we come back, we'll get back to Natalie Winters and some more of the breaking stories that we have on thenationalpulse.com. Head over there now. Welcome back to the National Pulse. We've got a few stories that I think bear looking at a little further and digging in a little deeper, and the mainstream media hasn't so much been doing that today. You know, CNN's been busy all day just calling random races again. You know, we're now calling Greenland for Joe Biden. We're not calling Greenland yet. Greenland is still up for account. Natalie, there are some other stories that just aren't being paid attention to out there at the moment, and I think they have, and I know that you think they have a lot of bearing, right? So why don't we start at the top? This new executive order by whatever Facebook says, President Trump. He's still the president.
Yes. Well, when you talk about what's at stake in this election and why it really is worth fighting so hard to ensure a second term for President Trump, I think you need to look no further than an executive order that came out yesterday. It's titled Executive Order on Addressing the Threat from Securities Investments That Finance Communist Chinese Military Companies. So to kind of take a few steps back, the Trump administration, as we know, has been targeting investment ties, lobbying ties, personnel ties between American companies and Chinese companies, frankly, since day one of their administration, but focusing on the Chinese military angle, that is the People's Liberation Army. Really, as I said, since day one, you've seen they've moved to sanction individuals who retain links to the Chinese Communist Party. They've put them on the entity list, effectively blocking any American companies from being able to do business with them. In June, they declassified a list from the Department of Defense since, I believe it was 1999, about 20 Chinese firms that they had identified that American firms have done business with, despite the fact that these companies help the Chinese military, whether that's through personnel or technology. And you have to remember, intellectual property theft is a huge deal with China and American firms when they collaborate. So effectively, a lot of times you see American technology, oftentimes it's subsidized by taxpayers, being developed, goes and boosts overseas in China. But this really is the culmination. So what you're seeing here is that it will take effect January 11th, and American investment firms, Americans, frankly, will no longer be able to invest in any company that hopefully the Trump administration or any government body, especially the Department of Treasury, deems to be a proxy or an offshoot of the Chinese military. But interestingly enough, if you kind of cross-reference some of the potential firms that could be targeted by this list, which in my analysis, it would be that DoD list that they recently declassified. You see China General Nuclear Corps. And a few months back, we had a piece up on the National Pulse talking about how Hunter Biden's investment firm, which he directed, Rosemont Seneca Partners, actually put up $10 million to be a part of the company's initial public offering. I believe that was back in 2014. It was one of the largest deals that entire year across every country in the financial markets. So effectively, what you're seeing here is Hunter Biden violating, really breaching potential future national security legislation. And I think that there's also just a really telling tale here in the sense that not only did China General Nuclear actually get individuals who are consultants for the company get arrested by our own Department of Justice for stealing nuclear secrets, which the DOJ flagged as really harming America's national security, but you see the Trump administration going after Joe Biden's son, companies that he's invested in using taxpayer dollars to effectively curtail and rein in his really insatiable desire to not only boost the Chinese Communist Party, but make millions while doing so as we
it wasn't just Hunter Biden.
Yeah.
He had 10% for the big guy, right? So this goes right to how a potential Biden administration could be leveraged by the Biden family to make more cash.
It's a perfect example when you see companies that his son has quite literally been involved with. We have the receipts, we have the hard drive, and even companies where the ties are a little looser in terms, like, for instance, CGN, the ties to the Chinese military are rock solid, right? The Department of Defense has flagged that company repeatedly. But China Energy Fund, the one where he bragged about being in business with the Chinese spy chief, Patrick Ho, or Ye Jianming, which, again, there's been extensive reporting on that company's ties to the Chinese military. I'm sure they would be left off this list if a Biden administration was to materialize. So this is what, when you start to see the reason why a Trump administration, a second term, is so crucial, because in no world should American dollars be going to boost the People's Liberation Army. And frankly, I think the only administration that would feasibly do that, and frankly, his son would be profiting while doing so, would be a Biden administration.
Sure. And there are wider implications to this as well. I mean, if you look at companies like Huawei, major Chinese companies that are linked to the PLA in some way, shape or form, who actually provide a lot of infrastructure within the United States, actually provide a lot of infrastructure in the Western world in general.
I was going to say, Huawei is in so many American homes and televisions. For example, companies like Hisense have partnered with their subsidiaries. They have former engineers running their global operations who've worked at their, Silicon Tech production facilities. So it's really concerning when you see the foothold that companies like Huawei, like their proxies, have in American homes, and really the only administration that has cracked down, because you don't have that corrupt lobbying influence that you see through Hunter Biden, is none other than the Trump administration.
Yeah, I think that's right. Another of these stories this morning, and it's sort of linked because the foreign policy aspect of all of what's going on right now are something I think that the left is paying particularly close attention to, while the right is trying to fight, for the future of the country in general, whether it's the rally that's taking place here in Washington, D.C., or the several rallies, I think, over the course of this weekend, whether it's the legal fights, whether it's the statistical battles. But what caught my eye this morning was an article, I think was in Defense One, and this was it Jim Jeffrey? Gosh, this morning feels like about a year ago. It looks like now what we're hearing from these people who declared themselves never Trumpers for so long, and actually hid information from the Commander-in-Chief, from President Trump, Facebook, about what was going on in Syria. They're now coming out and going, well, actually, the Trump administration's foreign policy is something that an incoming administration should try and stick to.
The article says Jeffrey believes Trump has achieved a kind of political and military stalemate in a number of different cold and hot conflicts, producing a situation that is about the best any administration could hope for in such a messy, volatile region.
Yeah, I think you'll start to see more of this now as the left tries to cement their victory. There'll be an element of magnanimity about it. It will be false and fraudulent, of course. But they also know that Trump did an awfully good job. And I think we'll continue to. We'll be right back. For the next three segments, for the next half an hour, Kane, the founder and editor of CitizenFreePress.com, joins us. Kane, welcome back to the show. It feels like a long time since we spoke last.
Yeah, it's been a while. As you said, 5 minutes ago, this morning feels like a long time ago.
Yeah, I think that's right. I want to play this video, guys, of the video that's coming out of Georgia right now, just so the audience can see exactly what Molly was talking about in the last segment or so. That really displays how we're not getting an actual recount. We're not actually getting a real audit of what's taking place. We're getting a recount of fraudulent ballots. That's not the point of a recount. And Kane, I don't know if you can see this. We're going to put it up on screen here as well, or if you've seen this video this morning from the Georgia. He's the head of the Republican Party in Georgia, and look, you can see it for yourselves. People are being kept. The watchers are being kept behind this yellow tape, 10, 15 foot away from people counting. And they can have as many people in there as they want, I'm told, but they have to be very, very far away behind that yellow tape. Kane, in your estimation, is that a recount?
No, that's just a Sunday stroll in the election precinct. It's a joke. Look, you're correct about the recount number. If they just recount how they've already voted, they're not going to be any huge changes. We need to analyze and find out, where a huge number of these mail-in ballots were coming from. There's a story that I highlighted last night and kept it at the top all the way till this morning, and it's from a Newsweek editor who leans for Trump. And he said the big story that's really going on here is how essentially no mail-in ballots were rejected in 2020. There was a stat that came out earlier this week that said the rejection rate was 30 times higher in 2016 in Pennsylvania than it is this year. So this is what we're finding out, and this was what this article, tried to expose. Is it sounds like in every swing state where Democrats had control, they didn't stop any of the ballots, any of the mail-in ballots. A missing signature didn't matter. They were instructed in some counties to fill out those signatures themselves. Missing addresses didn't matter. So I think that's what we're going to end up finding out here is that everything was allowed. You remember, I'll say this quickly, you remember in the 2-3 weeks before the election, how they were warning that as many as 100,000 ballots could be disqualified based on the same number in the primary. Well, that ended up not happening in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Georgia, it looks like. So to wrap this point up, we don't need a recount. We need an audit. We need to find out what percentage of ballots, of mail-in ballots were allowed and compare those numbers to previous years.
What is the in your estimation, the problem with getting this stuff? Because you would think that there is an institutional Republican Party out there. You would think that there are, conservative appointed judges out there. You would think that there were Republican secretaries of state out there who would weigh in. But every time I look for something, for some semblance of hope that we're going to get an accurate, fair, transparent is a key word, transparent recount, audit, whatever it is that needs doing in many of these places, I can't seem to see a path that actually leads us to a proper position on this stuff. So is the entire system corrupted at some level? Has the entire system been co-opted by what are effectively, the globalists, the party of Davos types, the people who like to go to the cocktail parties? Or am I just a raging nutcase conspiracy theorist who is pretending that there is some fraud here when there's really not, and Joe Biden won fair and square?
Well, as much as I would love to call you a raging nut conspiracy theorist, I don't think that's the problem here. There is fraud going on. The difficulty is proving it after the fact. Once ballots are separated from envelopes, what can you do? That's why I put a flashback story up today talking about how every piece of mail that passes through the USPS system is supposedly identified by photograph. That article came out in 2016. But so how do you identify this fraud? This is a cornucopia of fraud we've seen across several states. But the point you're making about everything, let's go back to this. If every mail-in ballot is accepted, if you know that you're going to allow all mail-in ballots, then that certainly makes fake ballots easier too, right? If you can suddenly, we've seen the problem nationwide of only top-line votes for Biden, and mostly in those 4 cities. So if you're going to do that, if you realize that there won't be any restriction on mail-in ballots, then you can essentially create those even without envelopes. So it's very frustrating. It's overwhelming at times. But I think to answer your question, yes, as long as mail-in voting is part of our system, it is open for this type of fraud when Democrats in these different precincts decide that the ends justify the means, that cheating is okay because their ultimate goal is more important of getting rid of Orange Man.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Kane, it was 20 years ago that Tony Blair instituted mass mail-in ballots in the United Kingdom, when we've never had a proper election since. Not a special election, not a national election. There's been fraud up and down the ticket every single time. And that's what's coming here, don't you agree? That you know, Tony Blair's good buddy now, Joe Biden, if he gets one foot in the Oval Office, will immediately grant amnesty and voting rights to 20 to 25 million at a minimum new citizens of the United States, and will institute an endless mail-in ballot system, which would need to be undone in the courts over years and years, would take us to the next election. This is why, as far as I'm concerned, Kane, this situation is so dire, so important, so pivotal for the way the world goes.
Absolutely. It's the most frightening thing. The ability to institute nationwide mail-in voting would most likely doom Republicans to becoming a permanent minority party. If they're able to get this done on a federal level, we may not ever win another presidential election. And that's why what's going to happen in Georgia on January 5th is even more important. Because we'll see what Biden could do with an executive order as this goes. But if he doesn't have the Senate, then he can't. Yeah. Then they can't pass legislation to make it legal.
Ken, we've got to go to a quick break now. Stick around. It's always a pleasure to have you. I want to get through more of that. What's going to happen in Georgia? The left is incredibly organized. And does the right have it together? We'll ask Kane when we come back in just a second. It's really not fair in all of that's going on right now. You know, everyone's ordering their new iPhones. Natalie's iPhone just arrives. Harlan's iPhone just arrives today. I'm stuck here with an old banger that's cracked and smashed, and this is justice for you. Welcome back to the show. Want to bring back Kane here, Citizen Free Press. I'm sure citizenfreepress.com looks really nice on a new iPhone. Natalie, must be great.
I'll let you know.
Kane, have you got a new iPhone today as well? Is this?
No, I do not. I'm a non-Apple user, Android, and I'm happy.
Very good, very good. Kane, Georgia. Now, look, I'm not trying to point fingers. There'll be plenty of time for an autopsy if this does shake out in Biden's favor. But the Trump campaign, at least until Bill Stepien and Jason Miller and those guys went in there, was, as far as I was concerned, just thoroughly disorganized. I would see videos and Instagram stories of, you know, staff in there every day, just hanging around, drinking coffees, eating donuts, you know, and it irked me, having run campaigns myself. But I thought, hey, I'm not going to say anything because that's not my job. I am but a lowly television anchor in this hour and a lowly reporter in others. But, you know, there's such a heavy focus that was placed on things that you may not, you know, in the autopsy think, actually, why did they pump all this money into this one rally? Or why did they pump all this money into you know, getting a 0.2% rise in a certain ethnic minority vote or whatever it is, right? So how can I trust that the national Republican apparatus is going to be in gear in Georgia? Because all I'm seeing right now everywhere, Kane, is tough talk from the left and some serious organization.
I have the same fears that you have, Raheem. And I know that you were concerned with this for weeks, perhaps even more than a month ahead of the election, just from private messages that you and I exchanged. And I know that you were ripping on certain elements of the national Republican infrastructure in order to be prepared for these things, and you saw that they weren't going to be prepared. So I think you can safely say that you saw it coming. And what you mentioned earlier in the show, before I was a guest, talking about how they've come to you now looking for statisticians, it's a little bit disheartening that we had, you know, that they weren't on the ball. And, you know, you mentioned the people now involved, Jason Miller, Tim Murtaugh, and others, and Attorney Lynn Wood. Hopefully that can do us a little bit of good. But yeah, as we look back, I think that there were some mistakes made. I think that they weren't completely prepared for the level of fraud that was going to occur. Even though they sounded the alarm about what mail-in voting could do, they weren't prepared for it to happen. Are you ready to talk about this Dominion voting systems story that just popped up?
Give me one more minute, because I think you're onto something really important and interesting here with what you just said, and then we'll move on. Okay. the president of the United States, and he is still the president, Mark Zuckerberg, he tweeted at the beginning of this year about the mail-in ballot process, about all of that. In the early months of 2020, we were hearing from the president almost every day. That's why the media went nuts. Remember, they're saying, there's no evidence of mail-in ballot fraud, and here are the 12 reasons that you shouldn't believe President Trump. And I did my own counter-article to that, showing that in most Western countries that have tried mass mail-in ballots, there's been a serious amount of fraud. I mean, the French threw the system out. That was how bad it was. And that's the French, right? So why wasn't the campaign, why weren't RNC lawyers, all of these people, all this apparatus, all of the Federalist Societies and the Heritage Foundations and all of these millions, dozens and dozens of millions, hundreds of millions in some of these think tanks cases that are plowed in from grandmothers who write $5 checks, $10 checks, much like our members do at the National Pulse. And if I ever behave like that, I hope they stop writing those checks. But why did those organizations not kick into gear, those institutions that are supposedly there to defend constitutional values, just ignored the warnings from the President of the United States?
Because they're think tank elites, and none of them are street fighters. They needed to have you as part of this. Look, I'll add a little bit more to what you've said. Don't forget what Jimmy Carter wrote. I think it was 2006 or 2007, the UN report talking about rampant voter fraud with mail-in ballots. So even, the prodigal son of Democrats has recognized. And two other things quickly that came out. The United Nations has specific criteria that they use to define whether or not an election is fraudulent or rigged. And I posted the flashback this week. It came out that our election meets all three of the major criteria that the United Nations utilizes. And one last thing, there was a story this week, heck, it might have been from the National Pulse, that the 2004 election in Ukraine was declared invalid because of the same criteria that would declare ours invalid. So now back to your question of why. Why isn't it happening when they were warned? I think you tell me, is our side too full of think tank elites?
No, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you exactly why it is, Kane, because the people in the Republican establishment, and I didn't intend to come on the show today and start pointing fingers, but I'm going to anyway. The people in the Republican establishment think they are smarter than President Trump. They do not respect President Trump. They never have. They begrudgingly went along with him in order to grift the real public out there who are Trump supporters, who are MAGA supporters, who really wanted to put America first right at the top of the docket again. And these organizations that went along, in name only, paying lip service to President Trump and his agenda, they don't like him. They never liked him, and they're going to be pleased to see the back of him if that's what happens.
I think you're right. And I think you see it. I'm not going to name the conservative news organizations, but you can tell several of the legacy conservative publications are full of these people that were riding on the coattails, grifting where they could, never liked President Trump, always held their nose. And you wonder if they've learned a lesson by the 73 million who've turned out to vote for this president. A big part of, we don't like to discuss it because we're still in this fight, right? We have to keep fighting. We have to fight as long as the president fights. But you don't really want to discuss the sort of longer term implications. But that question.
We have to, not least because I see a path to a loss in Georgia at the moment because the machine isn't kicking into gear. Because guess what? The machine wants another blow for the president and the president's agenda so that Mitt Romney can come along or so Marco Rubio can come along and go, look, the nation repudiated America First values. And so we have to bring it back to a free market, capitalist, Ayn Rand type Republican Party, which is BS. And it's never going to work in Pennsylvania or in Michigan or Wisconsin or any of those places again. We'll be back with Kane after this short break. Well, I am personally very, very honored to be part of the same side as somebody like Kane, the founder of CitizenFreePress.com. He always gets me fired up whenever it comes on this show. We've got a lot to cover in this last segment here on the show as well. But first, I just want to thank you guys for being on our side as well. You know, in the last segment, Kane talked about some of the legacy conservative media organizations that are just not in this fight. They're not up for this fight. And they're ready and willing to run their 800, 900-word op-eds repudiating this president and urging us to get back to John McCain's Republican Party. We at the National Pulse will not be doing that. We at the National Pulse believe in the America First agenda. We at the National Pulse believe that the troops need to be brought home. We believe that the trade situation as the United States and the Western world has it with nations like China are on its head, that we can't go on like that. And we believe, critically, that mass migration must be curtailed. And we will continue to represent those values at thenationalpulse.com. I want to thank some of the people who have been joining up over the last couple of days here. Ganesan, James, Carol, Richard, Kate, Cheryl, Ron, Catherine, Colleen, Brian, Anna, Pamela, Alberta, Deborah, Sandra, Cynthia, Peggy, Judith, June, Alex, a lot of ladies here. Christopher, Nikita, Joseph, Daniel, Missy. That's not Missy Owens, by the way. Stephen, Jenny, Samuel, Stacy, Pearl, Marie, Jake, Luz, Victoria, Alice, Robert, Robin, Jeffrey, Scott, Paul, Diane, Gary, Dana, Matthew, Heidi, Dan, Scott, Marley, Cody, Victor, Masataka, Luis Philippe, and more. Kathy, and more, and more, and more. And I want to thank you again. We try and read out some of the names of the people who have joined up in the last week, every single week here. If you want to join and support real news, head over to thenationalpulse.com/support. We've actually tinkered a little bit with the homepage there. I'd like some feedback on that. So let us know what you think. Well, Hagen and the team who build the site just do an incredible work. Kane, I know you have this big story at the top of citizenfreepress.com right now, which is my second favorite site out there, second only to the National Pulse, about Dominion voting systems. Tell us more.
Well, first, congratulations on getting more recognition for your site and more followers. I encourage everyone to go and become a contributor to the National Pulse. You guys do fantastic research, you and Natalie. So here's the story. How interesting. Kyle Becker, if people want to follow him on Twitter, at Kyle N.A. Becker. He's been following the Dominion story as closely as anyone, and he just reported in the last hour that how interesting, back in 2019, Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, and Senator Ron Wyden all issued a formal complaint to Dominion voting systems, and among those complaints were allegations of vote switching. People can find that story right at the top of Citizen Free Press right now, or they can go to Kyle Becker's Twitter page. He's a guy to follow. So included in that story was something he dug up that a week before the election, PBS, one of the few things that our public tax dollars in supporting PBS probably did beneficially for our side. They did a deep dive on Dominion voting system machines in Georgia, and what they found was troubling. I actually haven't had time to watch that video. It's a 2-minute video, but people will find it in the story. So there's, a look. You had your excellent guest on in the 320 to 330 mark, where she talked about if they can find any evidence, any specific evidence of Dominion fraud, that can blow this whole thing up. So there's still hope out there, and Dominion certainly deserves to have the focus directly upon it. I'll add one other thing really quick. I posted a story today that Texas evaluated using Dominion. By the way, Dominion is based in Toronto, and Texas evaluated and chose not to use them in the state because of what they viewed as troubling software errors.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we had the whole story up on that a couple of days ago, Kane, just walking through every single time and every single reason and rationale that Texas refused to use this system. And what you've got up here from Kyle Becker on citizenfreepress.com, I want to make sure that everybody goes there and favorites that page and bookmarks that page and checks it. I go through it every half an hour and check the page, Kane. But what you're talking about is this Kyle Becker tweet where they said, quote, "These problems threaten the integrity of our elections," and that was a formal complaint issued by, I guess, Liz Warren, Amy Klobuchar, Ron Wyden. And one of the biggest complaints in this, and people got to go read this themselves to look at the specifics, in 2018, voters in South Carolina were reporting that machines switched their votes after they'd inputted them, scanners were rejecting ballot papers in Missouri, and busted machines were causing long lines in Indiana. There were undisclosed vulnerabilities in nearly 36 back-end election systems across 10 states. And again, I want to repeat this line for you. These problems threaten the integrity of our elections, and yet, this company's systems appear to continue to be used in the most contentious election this country has seen in 100+ years, Kane. Just before we go, we've got about 2 minutes left here. I want to hand over the floor to you, Kane. What else is on your radar right now? What should people be looking at over at citizenfreepress.com? Is it the Alito thing I think you wanted to mention?
Yeah, there was Justice Alito. You know, he's an outspoken member of the Supreme Court. This isn't the first time he's spoken at the Federalist Society, but last night he gave a speech and the left is going nuts. And Justice Alito essentially sounds the alarm on the curbing of our free speech and religious liberties. He actually used the phrase unimaginable curbs on liberty. So that headline is in red. If people want to check out Citizen Free Press, they can find it quickly. You know, Raheem, I'll use the remaining 60 seconds I have just to throw some compliments your way and the way of the Bannon War Room. I'll let you know that the popularity of your videos and Bannon War Room videos has skyrocketed in the last 7 days. I read basically every comment on a story on my site that I'm interested in, and I can tell you that people really, really appreciate what you guys are doing, and they feel that you're pretty much the only outlet that is covering this with the attention and ferocity that it deserves. So I know it's not easy for you to take compliments, but I'm going to close it off there and say, keep the fight, get strong this weekend, and let's come back fighting Monday morning.
Walk toward the fire, as Andrew Breitbart said. Kane, citizenfreepress.com, thank you so much, and thank you for the compliments. You're a wonderful person to work with on a day-to-day basis. Make sure you head on over to citizenfreepress.com, ladies and gentlemen. Walk toward the fire. Don't worry about what they call you, all those things that are said against you, because they want to stop you in your tracks. But if you keep going, you're sending a message to people who are rooting for you, who are agreeing with you. The message is that they can do it too, and that you can do it too. Stick around here. President Trump's press conference on Operation Warp Speed will be covered here on Real America's Voice. The War Room returns for a Saturday special tomorrow at 10 a.m. and we'll see you here at 3 p.m.